Welcome, Ben. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, and thank you all for being here. And I'm sure it's the end of the day, so people are starting to lag, but we will excite you with lots of...
Indeed. It's funny, we've been talking a lot about the metaverse today, and there's always the risk if and when a metaverse catches on that we sort of deprioritize the sense of place. But I'm kind of old-fashioned, and I love being at a place. I still think it's really important. You are from here.
I am from the area, and I started my career by exploiting MIT students with the MIT Blackjack story that became the movie 21 about the MIT Blackjack team. So yeah, I did get started.
You read
here.
my mind. I'd love to kind of get the ball rolling since we do have a bunch of MIT students here today. Who may know you more for some of your later work. Let's briefly give a walkthrough of your career telling stories about MIT students, because it's not just the single instance, is it?
No, so basically I was a struggling writer living in Boston, and I was looking through some sort of, I was writing lots of thrillers. I was writing for the X-Files television show, if you remember that show, and I was just searching for my next story. And a friend of mine brought me to a bar near here called Crossroads, which a lot of you know because it's kind of an MIT dive bar. And there was a group of MIT kids there, and they were just like regular MIT kids, except for they had tons of money. And all of it was in $100 bills. And in Boston, you don't see a lot of $100 bills. They're just not, in New York, you see them all the time. And in Vegas, they come out of the ATM machines. But in Boston, usually you don't see hundreds. So I went over to the main character, and his real name was Jeff Ma. And I asked him why he had all this money. And he invited me to his apartment in the South End and pointed to his laundry. And in his laundry was $250,000 in just stacks of hundreds. And at first I thought he was like a drug dealer, but he didn't look like a drug dealer. He was, pretty much a math science guy. And then he invited me to Vegas. And it turned out that they were the MIT Blackjack team. And him and his friends had made $6 million playing blackjack, using math to beat the system, basically. And this was a real story, better than all of the kind of sci-fi I was writing. So I spent 6 months with them, and that became my first nonfiction book. So I never set out to be a nonfiction writer. I didn't want to be a journalist. I didn't go to journalism school as many in the...
You just saw a $100 bill one day.
Basically, I saw exciting money and crazy locales and a fun system where you could actually beat the casino, which to me was an amazing idea, and that became my first successful book.
Since then, you've done over 20 books, not all of which have to do with MIT, and not all of which have to do with crypto. But I do think it's kind of interesting that you started with MIT and gambling, and there's a strong through line in the gambling community of crypto geeks.
Yeah.
I'd love to kind of get to some of your most recent writing that's more directly related to the event today.
Yeah.
By way of your own introduction to crypto. So, were you a crypto adherent early on? Are you a crypto geek now?
So I came to crypto as many people do through the Winklevi twins. I didn't have any interest in Bitcoin. I had been pitched many stories about Bitcoin over the years, and had always turned them down because I'm not a math guy. It seemed, like something that was either a Ponzi scheme or whatever. And the word blockchain has always been really horrible to me. I think it's a very horrible word that makes my eyes glaze over. But what happened was, it was through the process of the social network. So the social network started for me 2 weeks.
Tell that story really quick. So the social network started as a book that you wrote.
Right.
So let's start with the story of that book, now that we've introduced Tyler and Cameron.
Yeah. So basically, I was sitting at home, and it was a couple weeks before the 21 movie premiere, and I got an email, a random email at 2 in the morning, and from a Harvard senior, and he said, "My best friend founded Facebook, and no one's ever heard of him." And I had heard of Mark Zuckerberg at the time. You have to remember, this was way back in 2007 or so. So it was when there was still MySpace and there was still Friendster, and Facebook wasn't that big yet. So I went out to a local bar here, and in walked Eduardo Saverin. And, if you've seen The Social Network, it's Andrew Garfield, but he doesn't quite look as good looking as Andrew Garfield, right? He looks like Andrew Garfield that's been kicked a few times. Eduardo sat down and had a couple beers, and I got to tell my kids not to listen for a second. And he sat down and said, "Mark Zuckerberg fucked me." That's how he started the conversation. And many people since have been able to say that, but at the time, I think it was the first time that anyone had actually said that. And he proceeded to tell me this crazy story about these two best friends, who had met in an underground Jewish fraternity. Mark had gotten in a lot of trouble because he had hacked all the servers and pulled up pictures of every girl on campus and made a website where you could rate the girls. And at that point in time, he found the Winklevi twins, and they had been working on their own project. And the story. They claimed he stole their idea. So when Eduardo told me this story, the first thing I did was attempt to find the Winklevi twins. So I went on Facebook.
Can we pause right there really quick?
Sure.
'Cause- So, had you started to form ideas yet at this early stage about who these guys were? You maybe had seen them before? I'm not sure.
Until I met them, I really didn't know much about them because nothing had been written about them yet. So they did not really exist yet in the public perception. They were involved in a suit against Facebook, but nobody knew who they were because there were no articles yet. They hadn't been on TV yet, nothing. Other than one Business Insider article, basically, there was nothing. So I went to New York. I found them on Facebook. They agreed to meet with me. And when they walked into the hotel room, it was something out of like Greek mythology. I mean, they're 6'5", identical twin Olympic rowers. They dress the same. They eat the same. They come into the room, and as a child of the 80s, to me, they were immediately the bad guys because they reminded me of the guys in the skeleton costumes chasing the Karate Kid around the gym. That's who they were. And so when I wrote Accidental Billionaires, they were one note. They were the big jocks. They were the men of Harvard, the 1950s sensibilities, and they are all of that. But that's all I thought they were. And then Aaron Sorkin took it a step farther, and Armie Hammer took it a step farther, and suddenly they became caricatures of themselves.
And so let's pause at the caricatures of themselves. So the book goes out there. The movie happens, gets all these awards, nominations, makes a huge scene, big conversation for years. And in a lot of ways, not only defined the way that a lot of people think of Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg, but defined the way that they think of Tyler and Cameron.
Yes.
So at what point in time did you start to rethink the way that your gut reaction there?
Yeah, I mean, I never thought I would hear from the Winklevi twins again. I think that was it. I thought they would row off into the sunset. They had earned $500 million in their settlement with Facebook. So they had a ton of money. I thought that was the end of their story. And what happened was my wife, Tanya, was reading the New York Times one morning, and there was a headline that said, Winklevi twins, well, it said Winklevoss, but it said the Winklevoss twins are the first Bitcoin billionaires. And this blew my mind because you don't really usually see second acts like this. You don't really see people coming back in a sort of second revolution. And quite frankly, to me, they were the establishment. They were not rebels. They were not the kind of people you would think would be involved in what at the time was known as something that drug dealers used and you used on Silk Road to buy drugs, right? So I was blown away by this. It was a Nathaniel Popper article, and I reached out to the twins, and they were gracious enough to meet me again. So I went back to New York, and they weren't mad at me for what happened with the social network, amazingly. And they told me this story of how they fell into Bitcoin and had essentially bought 200,000 coins at around $7 a coin in 2011, basically. So it was this incredible story, and they introduced me to what I had no interest in writing about when it was just math and the white paper and that. But when you have the twins involved, it suddenly became flashy and sexy. The idea that it was these guys running around the country trying to get people interested in Bitcoin. That's what kind of blew my mind.
When you first saw that headline, Bitcoin billionaires, what were your thoughts at that time about cryptocurrency? Had you done any research? Were you curious? Was it still just like way out there?
Right. I mean, I didn't know anything about it. To me, it was really Silk Road. And other than Silk Road, it was just something that a very small group of people who happened to be on the internet at the right time had fallen into at the right time. So to me, I didn't know anything about it. I hadn't really looked at the white paper. I didn't understand what it could be until I started researching that book. And I spent a year with the twins, shadowing them. I was the third Winklevi twin. and they kind of took me around, introduced me to all of the big names in crypto at the time. You know, I interviewed everyone in that story, which is Charlie Shrem, who is a really fascinating character, someone I got to know very well. It's pretty crazy. Roger Ver, who is his own form of crazy, and Eric Voorhees, and all the different characters. And I became a big believer, a really big believer in the future of Bitcoin and in the future of crypto, and essentially that this was going to be a revolution on par with Facebook.
So I want to pause there and talk about that conversion process. I honestly, to be totally clear, I did not know what his answer was going to be. I don't know the end of this story any more than you guys do. So that's quite a conversion process. You mentioned some really prominent names, some of them more prominent in the early days than they are now, but still, they played their important roles in the history of crypto. What was it about that experience? I mean, was it the guys? Was it the founders that you were meeting? Was it the technology? If you kind of just walk us through, what was it that personally got to you that sort of led to that decision and that mind change?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing was, Bitcoin itself. The idea of this sort of money of the future, the idea that, in the future, no one's going to carry around wallets. No one's going to have cash. We pretty much know that. There's not going to be sort of bordered money. I think that's pretty clear, too. There's going to be some form of universal money. I think if you've ever read science fiction as a kid, you pretty much believe that. And then the idea that it wasn't going to be backed by a government, it wasn't going to have people involved, that it was going to be mathematical at its core, that it was going to work the same way the internet works. That all made logical sense to me. The second thing to me was the passion of the people involved. I mean, people were real believers, and I've always been intrigued by stories that are something right in front of you that you kind of don't ever see, like a secret world you walk by all the time. I've always tried to find in my books that door that you never open, but you walk by 10 times a day. Suddenly you open it, and there's something really crazy going on in there with 100,000 people who are totally obsessed with something that you've never heard of. And that, to me, shows that something revolutionary might be happening, and that was what was happening at crypto at the time. So those were kind of the two main components of it, but it's also, just the idea that we're at the beginning of a very different world. The idea that we're moving into a virtual world, I think, is pretty clear to everyone, that we're going to be living in a digital world very soon. So when we live in a digital world, what form of money are we going to use? It makes sense to me that it's going to be something crypto. Whether it's Bitcoin or something else, I don't know, but I do think, the future of commerce is going to be in crypto. So I was born, I was blown away by all of that, and it was during that period that I started to be introduced to NFTs as well.
So I don't know if Mike mentioned earlier, the CEO of Forbes, my boss, sorry to name drop my boss, but he mentioned earlier that we did an NFT cover last year that sold for $333,000. There was an NFT of Tyler and Cameron.
Right.
The masters of the metaverse, I think we called them. And during my own interview process for that story, I spent some time in their offices shortly after your book came out. And it was really fascinating because from far away through the glass walls, you can see their two desks in the same corner suite there. And their library is your book.
Right.
There's like 100 copies of your book, and if you happen to glance around the side of the desk, you might catch a glimpse of a stack of books back there. I think that from a storytelling perspective, you've obviously done amazing work both on accidental billionaires and Bitcoin billionaires. Maybe got the tone a little bit different than you would have liked to on that first book, and kind of like did maybe a bit of what I would describe as a mea culpa in the second one. Please disagree with me if you take.
No, I do think that, and I've said this before, but I think with the social network, we got Mark Zuckerberg exactly right, and we got the Winklevi twins exactly wrong. I think that Mark has proven to be the person that we wrote about, but when you look at the Winklevi twins, there's much more to them than that. I mean, listen, they are those intense people. They are these believers in this sort of 1950s right and wrong, and they can be incredibly litigious and dangerous, I think, but at the same time, I think that they are very sort of smart. They know, speak 5 languages, they're financially very, very smart, and they were very forward-thinking when it came to Bitcoin and crypto.
So they have positioned your book in that office with intention.
Right.
When I walked in, it was the first thing I saw. Any investor that walks in, it's the first thing they see. Any employee that walks in, it's the first thing they see. They are certainly looking to sort of leverage what I think they perceive as an endorsement
Right.
for future opportunities. Having had a little experience with mischaracterization of a character in your Accidental Billionaires book, are you maybe a little concerned that you got this one wrong too, and 5 years from now, Tyler and Cameron could end up being these horrible villains?
I mean, gosh, I don't think so. Well, further to that story, they're going to be co-producing the movie on Bitcoin Billionaires, which we're hopefully going to be shooting later this year. Unfortunately, I don't think we can use Army Hammer again unless people are okay with the cannibalism thing that went on. But I think that in general, I don't know who we're going to find to play the twins, but I do think that I captured them certainly in this story very truthfully and honestly. You know, what happens between now and then, who knows? But I think in the scope of this story, I think it very much is who the twins are. But you never know what's going to happen in real life after you write a book. I mean, the characters continue living. So
Well put.
yeah.
Well put. So we will get to the movie. I think there's some really fun stuff happening there that we'll talk about hopefully at the end of the conversation. But before we get there, I want to talk a little bit more about the fact that, because there's another change that happened since you wrote the book, which is that Facebook changed its name. And Facebook changed its name in a very interesting way. I think I don't even need to say this, but Facebook changed its name to Meta, short for Metaverse, seemingly assuming that Tyler and Cameron did in fact come up with the Facebook idea, marking perhaps the second time that Mark has followed them into.
It's not the second time. So my belief is
Okay, go
that
ahead.
Zuckerberg is obsessed with the Winklevi twins and wakes up every morning thinking of them. And the Winklevi twins are obsessed with Mark and wake up every morning thinking of Mark. I really and truly believe this. Because not only did the Facebook thing happen, but then as the twins got into crypto, suddenly Facebook decides to launch Libra, right? Now, the twins company is named Gemini. Do you find this a coincidence? This is very odd to me. And I remember when this came up, I tweeted about it, and the guy who was running Libra came back at me with like a 10-tweet thread about how they came up with the name Libra and that it didn't at all have anything to do with the Winklevi twins. But it was so desperate a plea to me that it had nothing to do with the Winklevi twins that it made me think it had something to do with the Winklevi twins. I really, really think it did. I think it was a shot at them, and Libra failed dramatically, as I believed it would. I've always felt that if Amazon had launched Libra, Libra would have succeeded. Because we all trust Amazon. We all give our credit cards to Amazon every day. Every one of you, your credit card, Jeff Bezos has access to, okay? But Facebook, you get very nervous when Mark Zuckerberg has access to your information. Amazon has more data than Facebook does about you. Amazon knows what you buy every day and what's in your cupboard. But we don't have a problem with that because we trust Amazon. We don't trust Facebook. And so them attempting to launch a form of crypto was, to me, a huge misstep and was obviously not going to get anywhere. So now we come to the metaverse. And now it's the third time they're battling the Winklevi twins. I mean, this is like they're trying to write my books for me. It's it's the third act in this battle between Facebook and the Winklevi. And it all goes back to college. It all goes back to this geeky kid who couldn't meet girls, coming face to face with the two cool jocks who did have all the girls. I believe that's the key to, and maybe I'm going back to the 80s, right? But that's the key to this drama. It really is. He's running around the hallways of Harvard still.
I want to.
You're gonna watch this. You're gonna be so mad.
He is. Yeah. I want to spend just a little more time on that idea, especially with the applause from the audience. They want to hear more too. I want to talk a little bit about sort of the psychological differences between these companies.
Yeah.
And we should be really honest here and like transparent. Like the scale is almost incomparable when it comes to dollar amounts. Like, and when it comes to users, like Meta is looking at the 3 billion person mark. Gemini has maybe a couple 100,000.
Right.
And the market caps of these companies are not even close. So like the idea that Tyler and Cameron have somehow won is perhaps maybe slightly premature, but it is interesting that to a degree, and we'll get about we'll get into that caveat in a second. To a degree, people seem to be more willing to root for Tyler and Cameron than they do for Mark Zuckerberg.
Right, which is an amazing transformation. If you think about when the social network came out, I mean, they were the bad guys, and they represented the old Harvard establishment. And Zuckerberg was the revolutionary and the rebel, giving us the village of Facebook. Now it's the complete opposite, and Zuckerberg is the establishment, the silo that's attempting to capture the metaverse and own it, while the Winklevi are essentially the rebel forces on the ice planet or whatever it was, and they're attempting to sort of build this Web3 idea.
I want to remind you that he used to write for X-Files also.
Right.
I think he might be the biggest geek in the room right now.
I'm pretty geeky, but the metaverse is in the Winklevi idea open. It's Web3. We own it. The people own it. It's for every person themselves, and it's distributed around the world. And that's a very different concept to what Meta is attempting to do. And who knows who's going to win that battle? Obviously, Facebook and Meta are much, much bigger right now, as was the Death Star. But it doesn't necessarily mean they win the battle, because Web3 is essentially the people. And if Web3 goes the direction that I think most people hope it goes, the silos will fall. They're not going to be the thing that controls this. It's going to be distributed all over the place. So yeah, they've become the good guys in this drama, in this story, which is pretty intriguing, and we'll see where it goes.
So I told you I wanted to get in that caveat that people seem to be mostly more willing to root for Tyler and Cameron than Mark Zuckerberg. It's interesting that they were the force, to continue with the Star Wars metaphor here, that got your mind open to crypto. They were also the faces that Forbes decided to put on the cover for their first NFT cover. And last week, in fact, actually maybe it was a couple days ago, the New York Times put them on the cover of their newspaper, completely trashing them as for being sort of the symbol of the rich are continuing to get richer. And this goes back, I think, largely to a rock and roll concert that they played at what might be considered a very poor time as the market was cratering. Is there a sort of desire to bash the Winklevi twins that persists to this day?
Well, listen,
were they maybe actually being a little tone deaf and dumb there?
Well, I mean, it's a great question and an interesting question. Listen, as people, we love to trash wealthy people, right? I mean, it's part of the birthright as an American to trash more successful Americans. I think that's what we like to do, and they are emblematic of a certain upbringing and a certain level of privilege. They, as I said in Bitcoin Billionaires in the book, they started on third base, but it's still incredibly hard to get home. And essentially, that concept is hard to communicate in a way that doesn't cause people to get upset in some degree. So yes, I think that they're always going to have a visual problem. I mean, they're always going to have a perceptual problem.
There'll always be people like you that walked in and see these 6'5" people and immediately
that's who
hate
they
them.
are, and that's who they've been since they were very little. They walk into the room, everyone notices them, everyone has opinion. It's not always good, and that's kind of a battle they continually fight. They believe and they see themselves as underdogs, but an average person isn't necessarily going to see them as underdogs ever, no matter what they struggle through. And they have struggled through a lot of things. So yeah, they played a concert because they have a band that I haven't seen, that supposedly is very good, or I don't know, I haven't watched it yet. And crypto has been in a deep, dark winter, and so perceptually that probably wasn't wonderful, but I do think they're always going to have a target to that degree. If you read what they say and if you listen to what they're trying to do, I think for the most part people will agree with them. But if you look at them from where they came from and look at how wealthy they are, people are always going to have a hard time with them.
And you've since I can't even know the word, matured since your early interest in Bitcoin into a practitioner of the crypto arts, so to speak.
Practitioner of the crypto arts. Well, it's funny. So I've never been involved in anything I wrote about before. Usually I write big stories about other people making fortunes. And over again, the people I write about get richer and richer, and I don't end up buying into it for some reason. So I wrote about Facebook when it was nothing and never bought any Facebook. And I've done this, I wrote about Bitcoin and never bought any Bitcoin. And I kept doing this over and over again. And the Winklevi twins were talking to me about the NFT space. And I was amazed by the idea behind it, the technology behind it, the idea that something digital could be owned, could be unique, could be traded. It to me really hit a lot of notes for me, because a writer, when you go on book tours, it's almost always like you have a megaphone or a microphone. You do something like this and you talk to people, or you go on Twitter and you tweet to 50,000 people, and it's not a community. You don't ever get to be a part of something. You're usually the one on stage talking to people. And what I love the idea of there being a mechanism by which a community buys into what you're doing, is incentivized to see it succeed and builds it along with you. So I was thinking about, do I write about this? Do I write a movie about this? And I was approached by a guy named Adam Brotman, who is, he created the loyalty program at Starbucks. He was the digital head of Starbucks for years. And he was a fan of mine. And he's like, you really should do an NFT project around your works. So I essentially launched an NFT project where I dropped a collection that was based on the stuff that I write about. And if you buy the 3 collections, you get to share 50-50 in a movie I'm writing about the NFT space. So there's kind of an inception thing going on.
When you
where
say share 50-50,
yes. So basically, when I write the screenplay will be 50-50 owned by the NFT community. And then we'll take it to a studio, or we'll make it ourselves, and we'll see what happens. It's an experiment that I believe will become the model for how writers work in the future. My goal is this platform becomes a place. Thank you. I mean, we'll see what happens, right? But the idea is that other writers who maybe didn't have a chance to break in, because it's very hard to break into writing, depending on where you're from, there's a lot of walls, right? You could actually, rather than just send it out to a publisher, you could put together a chapter and some ideas and sell an NFT collection. If the people decide they like it, then that will succeed. It will be able to finance you to write the book, and it will become the audience for the book. And this could be a new model for publishing, essentially, that disrupts the way publishing has worked in the past. I do believe this is going to happen in film as well. You can fund a film through an NFT project, and what you're doing then is creating an incentivized community behind that project who are also the consumer of that project. It's really kind of intricate and really interesting. So as an author, my goal is to launch books this way, and every book I do will have an NFT component to it, and the audience will decide whether they want to be a part of it or not. It's not the publisher deciding this book is good and you should all read it. It's an audience deciding, we like what's going to happen in this book, we're already buying into it, and give us a copy of it. And that's essentially how I think, it's more of a competitor to sort of Amazon Kindle and the idea of self-publishing than it is necessarily to old world publishing. But I think it's a way forward that's very Web3, that's very interesting, and I think it's, what we've done is we've got 10,000 people on a Discord now, and we do things like we watch The Social Network together, and I live talked about it during the whole thing. Or we all had a get-together in New York during NFT NYC. It's these live parts of it that I think are really, really cool. The token becomes your entrance in it, your ticket into it. And it's just great for everybody. And if it works as a model, I really see this becoming something big. So
quick follow-up, and I think we do have to wrap it up. Are you interested? Are you exploring the possibility of publishing books as NFTs? We've heard a lot about albums as NFTs.
Right.
And sort of letting people own music again without having to rely on people like Apple to play that
music.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a great idea. I've definitely been considering that idea, and we've talked about it for my next project. It's a potential way to go. I think there's something really interesting about the idea that the book becomes something that someone can own and someone can sell and someone can, read it and then sell it to someone else. There is a great way to do that. And what's great about NFTs as an artist, as a musician, is that royalties are built into it, into the contract. So no longer is it the music studio or the movie studio basically doles it out as it goes along as it wants to, and you never earn anything because they never.
I personally love the idea.
Part of the story, yeah.
If you go to like a Bauman's Rare Books in Manhattan, and all of their books are like 6 figures plus, right. And the reason why they're 6 figures plus is because we know whose collection that book came from. right? So it's not just the first Encyclopedia Britannica. It's the Encyclopedia Britannica that Benjamin Franklin owned.
Right.
And it's worth more because of that. Books have value because of provenance. And I personally would love to see something where we can go back to like an ebook, but that I can loan or give away, and I lose possession of it in a way that you now have the one that I used to have. The idea of provenance in books is very exciting.
Yeah, it is really neat, and we've definitely considered and talked about the idea of doing a book that's 1,000 copies, and that's all it is, and then it trades around and trades around. It's intriguing to me, and I think that publishing it works because you don't have to reach large numbers of books to have a book be successful. It's not like a movie where if 50,000 people saw the movie, it's a failure. 50,000 people read your book, it's a huge success. So that actually says something sad, but it's an interesting place for it. So I do think NFTs are really going to transform the publishing industry.
Please give Ben a big round of applause. That was awesome.